I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about your ideas of security. You know, it seems today in this world filled with events and circumstances that we are always, as a people, concerned with our security, whether it's job security, income security, or safety. We want to feel secure and we want to feel safe. And we do all kinds of things to assure the reality of our security. But in truth, the source of our security is beyond ourselves and is seated deeply within our own minds and within our own thinking. We think so often that it's a job, or that it's bars on the window, or that it is an income or the guarantee of it, or insurance that we have that's going to provide our security. But all of our life experiences move and change, and we are not able, nor should we be so preoccupied with security as we often are in our lives. All of these ideas of security and the need for security come from a dynamic within our mind. And in our mind, so often we feel that we won't have enough money, that we won't have the job that we have obligations. And often these thought processes that are created aren't real, but are created within us, and are created within us because of our fear of insecurity, our fear for the future, our fear of things that might happen. In New Thought, we have a definition for fear, and it's talked about often and widely, and that is that the letters of the word fear, F-E-A-R, stand for false evidence appearing real. That means that we are afraid of things that we think are going to happen, that might happen, and the things that we're most afraid of aren't really real. If we have a job and we have income and we have a family and we have certain things, in our mind we create a seed thought that says, maybe something's going to happen and I'm going to lose my job. Maybe something's going to happen and I'm going to lose my health. Maybe something's going to happen and we won't have the house. Maybe something's going to happen and we won't be prepared for retirement. And so all of the maybes, all of the what ifs of our life create such fear within us and create such insecurity that we overstrive for an issue and a level of security in our lives and in our being. A number of years ago, there was a relatively successful young man who came to our church, and I was talking to him in a couple of sessions, and he was just tremendously worried about his family, both his wife and his young children that he had of recent years, and his parents, and even his brothers and sisters. And one of the things that he said to me was that he was successful at this point in his life, and he was approaching 30 and had many advantages, a great job, a great family, financial security, a lot of peace. And his real goal, and the expression that he shared with me, was that he wanted to provide security for his wife, for his children, for his parents, for his brothers, for his sisters, for all of the people in his family circle, in the group that he loves so much. And as I talked to him, my thought processes were that maybe there were people in his family that needed special help with their security. Maybe his parents were infirmed and aged. Maybe he had brothers and sisters that needed help for one reason or another because of handicap or lack of education, financial difficulty. I really didn't know, but it appeared very clear to me that this young, successful, dynamic person wanted very much to take care of the needs of those around him. But as I came to know him better, and as we talked in these discussions and sessions, I found that his wife had a successful career. His children were fine. His parents were still working and had all of their needs met. His brothers and sisters were married and were in positive and supportive relationships. And yet he had within him a need to provide security for all of these people who, for me as an outsider looking into his life and looking into his vision, had all the security they needed, and they had it in and of themselves. But he had a need. He was over-preparing, over-anticipating, overburdening himself with the reality in his thought and in his process for the security of these people. At the very core of his need to provide for the security of these people that he loved was the dynamic and the reality of fear that he had within himself. Fear that they wouldn't have what they need. Fear that he wouldn't be able to provide for them. Fear that they wouldn't be able to do it on their own. And the creation of all of these processes of mind, which created really insecurity in the midst of absolute security. And here I saw the picturing of a wonderful family that was tremendously secure. But in the midst of their security, this individual who had taken upon himself the great concern for the security of everyone had a burden and a worry and a problem because of the insecurity that he felt within himself and that surrounded him. How much better if he could have had a consciousness and an awareness of the absolute security of his circumstance and situation and the absolute security of those around him. So often in our lives, we are saving for the rainy day, and certainly a certain amount of provision for our security makes sense. Pension plans, reasonable savings, reasonable planning. But even in the midst of all of the planning that we do, no matter how secure our environment is, circumstances and situations will present themselves in our lives, in your life and in my life, that will bring into our life experience issues and times when things don't work out exactly the way that we would have wanted them to. But as always, we need to draw upon the processes of our mind and the dynamic of our mind. Do you feel secure? Do you feel secure within yourself that your needs will be met, that all of your needs will be met? As a child of God, you have that ability. And if in fact you trust in a loving God and in a universe of abundant supply that provides for every need, our security is already taken care of. That doesn't mean that we don't have to have responsibility for having jobs, meeting obligations. Those are daily responsibilities that are a part of life. But the feeling that we have of insecurity is so often misplaced because we are secure. You remember the story in the Bible of the Israelites as they were traveling across the desert, and the concern was, how will we be fed? What will we have? And they were provided manna. And manna came from heaven, and it fell down, and their needs were met. And what they were told by God, what they were told in spirit is, don't hoard the manna. You don't need to collect it for tomorrow. You will have enough for today. And what happened was, most of the children of God accepted it and consumed what they needed and then trusted God for the fact that tomorrow more manna would be provided. Others hoarded the manna and kept it because they believed there wasn't going to be enough. And what happened to those? When they saw the manna that they had saved and when the day had passed, the manna was rancid, it was rotten, and it was no longer useful for their purposes and for their needs. Our life and our understanding of security is and should be exactly the same. We must do what we must do, but if we do our part, we will be provided with that which we need. And our need for security is provided by the fact that we know that God, in His infinite intelligence, will guide and direct and provide. It doesn't mean that we can fold our hands and sit down. It doesn't mean that we don't have to have responsibility and a sense of purpose and a work ethic and understanding. But it does have to do with the reality that if our thinking is right, if we align our thought processes with the processes of mind and with divine light and life, we are secure. And the manna, the needs of our life will be provided. And we won't have to be concerned about our own security and the security of those around us. There is an abundant supply, and I'm not talking about the abundance of physical wealth, money, or food, although those are present and provided to all of us. I'm talking about security and abundance in meeting all of the needs of our life. That means having the emotional strength, having the spiritual strength, having the stamina, having the guidance and the ideas to do the things that you must do, that I must do, that we all must do. How secure are you? If your relationship with divine mind, if your relationship with God, if your understanding of the divine principles of life are properly aligned, as the Israelites, the children of God, were instructed so many thousands of years ago, if we can align ourselves with that same thinking, the manna will be provided, the needs of life will be provided, and because of that, we have no need to worry about insecurity. We have no need to provide for our own security because all of the things that we need to create a positive and secure environment will be presented to us, will come into our lives. There is one source of security in this world, and that is the divine principles of life. That is the presence of infinite intelligence and the love of God. That is the only source of security. Everything that we do to provide for our own security can be taken away. The jobs can be lost, the money can be misinvested, our own safety can be questioned and can be compromised. But our source of security comes from the innate ability that we have to remember our connectiveness to the infinite power and mind of God, to the intelligence of God. It doesn't matter what church you go to, it doesn't matter what faith tradition you come from, and the principle that I'm talking about has nothing to do with changing your religion or your spiritual belief system. It has to do with changing your spiritual mind, dynamic, and attitude of life. And no matter what your faith tradition, by simply understanding that the one source is God, your security is cared for. And every religion and every spiritual dynamic teaches us and invites us to understand that reality, that our one source is God. We need to seek creative insecurity. And what we need to do when we seek creative insecurity is not to hold on so tight and so close to those things that bring us security. Perhaps it's a job. Maybe that job will be taken away. Maybe you'll be guided and directed to go into a new area of work. Perhaps you're in an area of work now that you don't like, that's not providing you with any personal satisfaction, but is only providing you with income. What we need in those circumstances is the ability to seek creative insecurity and to know that you can leave that job and find another one. That if you're in a situation where your security is threatened, where you maybe don't have a place to live, or you're looking at the reality that in a few months you won't have a place to live, that connecting yourself with divine intelligence will guide and direct you into the place where you need to be. And so in our insecurity, in our own insecurity, in a creative way, we can be secure, because as things move out of our lives, something else moves in to take their place. Another aspect of dealing with our security invites us and calls us to identify everything with the power and the presence of God. That means that if you do lose your job, that God is there with you in the midst of that. If you do lose your house, God is there with you in the midst of that. If you do come to harm or difficulty with your physical body and insecurity there, then God is in the midst of that circumstance and situation with you, because faith is the key to security. And faith is the understanding that the only security that we have is our connectiveness with and love for divine intelligence in the presence of God. And with that presence, we don't need anything else, because the things that we need will be drawn to us, guided and directed. So it's a way of thinking. And if you've thought of security as being vested in your job or in your checkbook or in your house or in the bars on the windows or the locks on the doors, those things may help. But don't allow them to consume you. And understand that your single most great strength of security comes from the relationship that you have with the infinite and the power and presence of God. We'd like to invite you to pause for a few moments of prayer with us. We believe that prayer is a strengthening and empowering opportunity as we connect with the centering presence of God. And so we invite you to join with us in a reflection. Eternal God, we gather our hearts and minds together in the need that we have for security. But the security that we need is not something that we have to seek after or provide for ourselves, but the security that we need in our life pilgrimage on this earth is to connect our thinking and our thought with your divine intelligence, your divine presence, and to embrace you to provide for all of the security that we need. And we know and ask these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That was a beautifully presented security plan.
Very important. And, you know, we have security plans for securing our buildings, and we have alarms, and we have all kinds of things, and certainly those fulfill a purpose. But we need a security plan for our soul,
Yes.
and for our heart, and for our mind.
And if that's taken care of, then we don't fear the other, and it's the fear that causes us problems. Today when I was walking on the street, automobile alarm went off, and it was so loud, and it not only had one set of sounds, but it had an oversound, a clinking oversound. So there was two sets of sounds happening at once. And I wondered, why does someone think they need that? Because the car's parked out in the open there on the street. Why do they need that? And the slightest thing sets it off. But it's fear
It is fear.
Is why he thought he needed it.
And obviously, not obviously, obviously to you and to those of us who understand the principles, but we understand that the insecurity and the environment that we are in the midst of, that causes us to alarm everything and lock every door, and the violence that we have, is really created by the collective consciousness.
Yeah.
And we can see this dynamic, and certainly people will argue against what I'm about to say, but we know it to be true, that when a neighborhood, for instance, has a break-in, and then all of the neighbors become concerned about break-ins, and everybody gets more locks, and everybody becomes more vigilant, and everyone's thought process is turned to the fact that we're in a violent neighborhood, we're all unsafe, terrible things are going to happen to us. Guess what? Terrible things start to happen to us. And the thought process, and that is so fundamental to what we teach, and that is that our minds create. And we are coming to a point in time when more and more people are coming to understand that principle. But as we create insecurity, we create more of the same.
Yes, that we know we're co-creators with God the whole, and whatever we create, whatever we think, we're creating, and we're co-creating. And God gave mankind free will, and with that free will, we're allowed to think whatever we choose, and we often choose to think negative thoughts.
And I think it's important that we clarify the fact that we're not talking about everybody getting rid of their door locks.
Exactly.
And we're not talking about people leaving keys in the ignition to the car,
Yes.
but we are talking about doing the things that are prudent to do. But even in the midst of doing those things, it is not to dwell and to call those things, that reality into our being. One of the things we've talked about before, and we talked about in some of the other programs, is the passage in Job about that which I feared has come upon me. And so as we talk about those things, I think a great example is if we go back to the counseling that we do on health, from the standpoint of health. So many people will develop the diseases that they're most afraid of. And if they're afraid of cancer, they'll end up with cancer. If they're afraid of any number of diseases, so often those will become manifest. And we need to be cautious of what it is that we think and how much creative power we give to that.
Yes. Well, Dr. Simonton and other doctors have shown how that's true in reverse. When people have cancer, then they have to see the cancer, acknowledge it's there, and then send guns and ammunition in to fight the cancer and to get rid of it, to obliterate it. And it works. It's worked so much. That visualization process has worked so greatly. So we know that if it worked to get rid of it, that's exactly the same principle that created it.
Exactly. And that's exactly the same principle that we need in our own personal security plan. We need to continually visualize ourselves protected. We need to visualize our needs met. We need to visualize our finances multiplying. We need to visualize all of those things. And so often in life, I think, especially from the financial side, we do far more preparation than we need to, and we hoard far more than we need to. And one of the principles, of course, to having financial needs met is to give. And so as we give and create the outflow and the inflow, our needs are met. And as we're surrounded by violence in our neighborhood, we need to create and center our consciousness in the security and the presence of God and peace. And I think that the changing of the thought processes can create a tremendously different dynamic for security.
Yes. Well, one proof of that is that our church, Christ Church, at our Wednesday evening services, the people are praying for healing for whoever wants to ask healing for themselves, and it's worked. And several have been healed, and that service has just been going now for 2 months. But several people have had wonderful healings, as you know, and that's exactly the mind dynamic that you're talking about.
Yeah, that creative force becomes so powerful.
Right.
And from a security standpoint, all of the things, the car that you were talking about, the alarm, we have one at the church even, but the alarms that we have and that we create, in the midst of all that we're doing to be secure, we are more insecure. And in fact, if we would let go so often of the negative thought processes and stop creating the insecurity, security is simply a divine right. We are secure.
Yes. And you said it so well in your lecture that if we have our spiritual faith, our spiritual belief, our spiritual undergirding, then we don't need that. That's our security. We don't need these other things. Our logic tells us we need to lock our doors. Our logic tells us we need to take the precautionary measures. But then we do that without putting a lot of energy into it and a lot of fear into it. And so it's the energy we put into it, the thought forms we create that surround that object, and that's what creates the energy that draws like to like. And
And if we look at the insecurity issue that so many people feel with about their person,
yes,
if we look at homes with burglar alarms, and then on top of burglar alarms we put bars on the windows, and on top of bars on the windows we're afraid to go out at night, and on top of that we add more locks to the doors, and then we sit inside in fear that someone's going to come in.
yes,
Well, doing all of these things, and certainly there are some prudent things to do, but when we do all of these things collectively and then give it strength, just as you said so well, we're drawing it to us.
exactly. And that's what we need to remember, that if we have faith, then we don't build up that negative energy, because we take the precautionary measures, but then we drop it. We think of other things. We don't put energy into that. And it's as we put the energy into it that, just as we were saying earlier, it can create the problem, or it can create the healing, the result that we desire. Whether it's, as you said, finances, money, or friends, or personal security, or security of our buildings and cars and other property and so forth.
Financial security is an issue that so many people struggle with, and I think that a Bible principle and parable that we shared in terms of manna is very important for us to understand with all the resources of our life, that God provides for us abundantly. And again, we're not talking about people just simply sitting and waiting for it to come. That's not the principle at all. But there is the provision for us always of having our needs met, and even for us at any point in our lives. So many people come to us for counseling and in their discussions, especially older people, and they say, we're on fixed income, there's no hope, and there is this feeling of tremendous insecurity. And yet we see many, many people who, in the ends of their life, when their earning power is not the strongest, circumstances and situations do bring prosperity to them.
Yes, but when they say they have no money, then they think they limit themselves. I know there's 2 different young women who've asked me for counseling time at the church, and both of them have told me, I don't have any money to pay you, but I understand you give free counseling. And I say, that's right, we do. And with tongue in cheek, because I know what's going to happen. They're not going to have their needs met because they're not meeting their obligations and responsibilities. And then later they tell me they spent money for this or that or the other thing. So they're defeating their own purpose. But they're learning and growing, and they're young. And so they need to learn the laws of prosperity, the laws of nature.
Yeah, and the security of the laws.
Yes.
Because the laws do provide for us to have our needs met and for us to be very secure.
Yes. And so if they put their faith in that, if they know that that's true, then they don't limit themselves. And then they don't have to say, well, I don't have money for this, I don't have money for that, because we all have the money to do whatever we really want to do, and we're capable of earning that money.
And the creative power that they're making manifest when they say, I don't.
Yes.
I mean, that statement that I do not creates for them the have not.
Yes, yes. But more people are learning those laws, I think, don't you?
Oh, definitely.
It's a wonderful thing that more and more people are becoming more hopeful, more encouraged, more faith-filled, and they live the life of a spiritual life. And I don't mean churchianity, I mean a spiritual undergirding of the inner within themselves. The core of their own being is more at peace, I think, on most people.
And their sense of security becomes stronger and more dynamic and more powerful. And as their security becomes stronger, their need to be secure takes up less of their time, because they're able to do things that need to be done rather than worrying about their insecurity.
Yes, and that's, I think, one reason for that is because we're living in this time of great change, and people are really rolling with it, and they're learning and growing, and they're not just giving up and flinging their hands up and saying, I can't do anything. More people are looking to the inner. More people are looking for spiritual truth to take them through whatever is going to be they're going to be facing.
And of course, we believe firmly that the inner strength that we have, the spiritual strength, provides for all of our external needs. And so as we're strong within and as we're secure within ourselves, then our insecurities begin to fall away in other aspects and areas of our life.
Yes, and to really know that and to live it is a very important thing. To really live it is important, more important than just knowing it, because then we can be examples for others, and I can look out at other people and see those who are wonderful examples for me, and therefore the wonderful example for others. And it's those who are not fearful, and who know that, who who take responsibility for their lives. They don't expect God to furnish everything for them, but they expect to do it themselves. But God gives us the opportunity.
Mhm. An affirmation could be used right now, and that we could use the affirmation as I will be directed to my good. I
Good.
will be directed. And as we begin to believe that we are secure and that we are directed, then we're called to action. So it's not an issue of just believing God's going to do it.
Yeah.
God has done it
Yeah.
in terms of giving us the truth and giving us the lessons and giving us the principles. And as we apply the principles, then our needs are met.
Yes, it's all there all the time. We have but to draw from it to take whatever we need to do whatever we need to do. But that is a wonderful affirmation. And I know you teach that very strongly, the power of affirmations, and there is great power in that.
Yeah, affirmations are the easiest principles, I think, for people to learn because through the repetition of affirmations, we begin to condition our minds.
Yes. It's like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music,
Mhm.
in her song, you know, that she's saying that uh, we, we're just about as cheerful as we make up our minds to be,
That's right. And
as courageous as we make up our minds to be.
we live in our minds and not in the world. And so Reverend Freelander and I have been talking over the last few minutes to you about ideas of security. And we hope that you are secure in the reality of your relationship with God. And we hope that these ideas have brought you some food for thought. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within.